You're listening to the Inside Podcast Network, podcasts for the enterprise.
And we're here for an ad hoc edition of Inside the Microsoft Cloud podcast. I have with me Corey Sanders. Now, Corey, your title is a bit of a mouthful. I'm going to let you tell folks what you do.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely. So my name's Corey Sanders. I'm the Director of Program Management responsible for compute in the Azure team. So that includes the Infrastructure as a Service product and cloud services as well.
And the lead developer of Actoroids, if Build is any.
That's correct, yeah. If you saw Mark's session at Build, I actually didn't build it, but I ended up becoming sort of the expert to play it, which is why he invited me on stage. But then if you watch it right at the end, I was a little bit embarrassed since it didn't quite work. He blames me for it, though, publicly, actually. Quite publicly, he blamed me for that.
Somebody has to take the fall.
That's right, and it's clearly not going to be Mark, so I'm the right guy, so that's okay.
So Actoroids was great. The Mesos demo was fantastic.
Yeah.
I think fundamentally there was something really important there that really speaks to the future of our IT pro audience here, and that's the JSON template-based methodology you have in Azure IaaS v2.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I wonder if you could talk to us a bit about what that means for the future of deployment automation for the IT pros out there that are really trying to wrap their head around a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what we announced last week was a new Azure Resource Manager support for infrastructure as a service. And so what this means is actually all of the components around compute, networking, and storage can now be fully modeled in a JSON-based template. It's really exciting because you can take what used to take maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 PowerShell operations that you had to sort of do back-to-back in a serial way. You can now put it into a single file. You can check that file in, right? You can save it somewhere. You can put it into GitHub, right? Make sure that you've got it saved and other people can build on it. But it also will parallelize the deployment. So if you have, let's say, a SharePoint farm, 3 front ends, 2 back ends, an Active Directory, you can now have all of them deploy mostly in parallel unless there's dependencies between them. And you can also model those dependencies and so make it really sort of repeatable and very easy to deploy big, large workloads with a single click.
And when you talk about parallel, a lot of your IT pros that are already automating Azure-based VM deployment, think about that lock we see on the cloud service when you deploy a VM. Yeah. So how are you making that happen?
Yeah, great question. It's been one of actually the banes of my existence over the last couple years. As we originally brought out infrastructure as a service, one of the most common complaints we've seen is when I want to deploy really quickly back to back, I see this lock in sort of the API. And so this part of this deployment of this new template language was to support to remove that lock actually. And the way in which we do that, to give sort of a deeper view into how we've deployed, we actually use the service fabric, which was announced last week as well as our infrastructure. And so that enables us to do many operations back to back to back, right? And so the template language allows you to parallelize, but even if you don't want to parallelize, you still shouldn't see that lock anymore, which is a really exciting improvement to the stack.
Yeah, so our deployment time should go way down.
Way down.
And I think the other takeaway there is we can blame Corey for the
original lock.
The original lock.
That's right.
But you fixed it, so it's okay.
That's right. You can send it out to me on Twitter if you're seeing that right now, and I'll tell you how to fix it.
And I noticed over the last month, your team have basically written and shared a lot of templates through the MSDN site.
That's right. Yeah. So what we've got now, it's actually in GitHub, and so we host all of them in GitHub. It's in Azure, and it's actually in the Quick Start Templates location in Azure. And we've got, I think, upwards of like 60 plus templates in there that you can go deploy and get started with, and it makes it really easy to just go learn sort of how things come together. There's a great set of both open source and Windows-based solutions, so you can build a full Elasticsearch cluster, a full SharePoint farm, right? They're both available, Apache server, et cetera. And so there's a lot of different ways to get started and learn how the system works.
Great. So at the root of it, your templates are JSON-based, and most of our IT pros out there can spell JSON.
Yeah.
We have a lot of PowerShells out there, so what's the ideal authoring experience going to be for an IT pro that's trying to move from a position of pure PowerShell into to really learning JSON and working with those templates effectively?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a lot of different options that you can use to author it. We've seen folks directly author in GitHub, which has a reasonably workable authoring experience. You can go in and edit the files directly in there. Visual Studio's actually got deep integration, so you can go into Visual Studio. Actually, Visual Studio will allow you to pre-create objects. So you'll go in and say, I want a virtual network. You'll hit the plus virtual network, and it'll just sort of pre-populate the whole thing into your template. We've also seen, just Notepad++. I mean, the nice thing about JSON, which is one of the reasons why we've chosen it, it's very human readable, and so the entire focus is you can go into just sort of a simple Notepad and make a bunch of changes and deploy, similar to PowerShell, actually.
Yeah, so you hit on my favorite two tools there. So I was doing a lot of work with these templates this weekend in Notepad++ and in Visual Studio.
Yep.
So in Visual Studio, I felt like you're starting to visualize these templates on the left-hand pane.
That's right, exactly.
So are we going to see that continue to build?
You absolutely will, yeah. You'll see a lot more of this visualization, being able to piece things together. As these templates get more and more complex, the dependency and passing parameters is going to become more important. And so having a way to visualize them, I think, is going to be crucial to the sort of the future direction. So you'll see a lot of that populate throughout, even in the new portal, and in Visual Studio, you'll start seeing quite a bit more visualization start showing up.
So dare we say Visual Studio might be the ideal authoring experience for an IT pro as we move on because of that visualization? Yeah,
I mean, I think Visual Studio certainly is the most advanced. I think far be it for me to tell IT pros which tool they want to use. I think my goal is to make sure that they all are going to work great. But Visual Studio has a lot of investment to try and make that experience really, really spectacular. Yeah. The other thing I'll say is even with PowerShell, we do actually have with this new API the deep integration with PowerShell. You can deploy directly using PowerShell, and so you can pull from GitHub directly, pull a template in and deploy right through PowerShell, which again will make it really easy for folks to sort of manipulate these things.
Yeah, and so Corey's mentioned these templates a few times, and so if you can spell JSON and you don't know much else today, I think that's the important element there, is you can deploy these templates with PowerShell. You can use those existing examples. There are examples out there. I saw virtual networks. I saw availability set with a load balancer.
That's right. Yep.
And you've heard Corey kind of allude to the fact that as we move into that world of V2 networking, the cloud service disappears as a logical construct.
That's right. Yeah, the cloud service is gone, and more of the network now can actually be modeled. So it's a much more software-defined network where you can go and model, and some of the other additional things you can now actually model routes as well. And so that's something that's been announced this week. And so a lot of great stuff that's come out. The other thing I'll probably add as well is what was even announced today on stage in the keynote was this exact same model, right? This exact same template, this JSON-based solution will be able to be deployed in a private or hosted cloud on top of Azure Stack. And so the big announcement today was, last week we talked about the new model. Now we talk about how that new model can be deployed in a private cloud as well. And so we'll be now the only sort of hyperscale cloud provider that offers both a private and a public cloud offering.
Fantastic, and I know you're running short on time, so tell us where we should be following you this week.
Definitely, so you can follow me on Twitter, so it's at Corey Sanders Wah, and you can see we'll have a few videos probably going live again later this week, some additional Tuesdays with Corey, which is a very popular show,
so there's Azure Friday with Scott Hanselman, and now Azure
Tuesdays with Corey. Yeah, it's a play on the very popular novel, but I'm not going to die in the end. So spoiler alert.
Up and comer. Corey's going to give Mark a run for his money.
That's right. That's right.
Well, hey, thanks very much for the time.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great talking with you.
Great conference.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.